Good evening, I'm Alan Jackson and welcome to Nashville. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the public push for solar panels and electric cars now that the federal government is no longer going to be using the taxes we pay to subsidize selling them. Electric cars have been selling with big subsidies, $7,500 for new cars and $4,000 for used ones. Well, that's ending in about 2 months. And until next year, solar panels are being sold with big tax breaks, regardless of whether they work well or not. I've seen stories of how they get layers of dust and pollen on them and need to be cleaned so that they actually absorb the sunlight. I wonder if the people who clean our gutters do that as well. But that's changing. Now we have some common sense coming from Washington. So we've invited our best source on all things green, who's joining us on the set this time, Marc Morano, the publisher of ClimateDepot.com and a former senior staffer of the Senate's Environment and Public Works Committee. Welcome to Nashville, Marc.
Thank you, Evan. Happy to be here.
It is really good to have you here. Well, you've seen how the federal government works from the inside and outside. With President Trump in the White House and now Lee Zeldon at the EPA, it looks like facts will now prevail versus the panic that Al Gore tried to promote. The tax credits for solar panels are ending in January. So will the solar industry stand on its own without these subsidies?
That is a great question, and history has shown that the solar industry can't even stand on its own with the subsidies. We've had many multi-billion-dollar failures from Solyndra to even more recent ones under the Biden, so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And what it turns out is solar and wind can really only survive with the subsidies. And you'll hear people like Al Gore claim repeatedly, solar and wind are the cheapest forms of energy. They're cheaper now than fossil fuels. Really? Are they accounting for the rare earth mining, the monopoly of the goods from China, the human rights violations, all the fossil fuels required to make the solar and wind panels, all the fossil fuels required to transport the solar and wind panel components from China, all the fossil fuel components required to install them, all the fossil fuels required to clear cut forests to put in. There are so many things that are not green about solar, wind, and EVs, by the way, that it's become a farce to even discuss that. But basically, we're seeing it now. We're already seeing corporate media, the mainstream media, come out and say that the solar and wind industries are facing basically a doomsday, which then raises the question, they couldn't survive on their own. They literally needed endless, permanent taxpayer subsidies. And here's the kicker with all of this. It's a very simple concept. You can go back 20 years, you can go back 100 years. 80%, nearly 77, 78, 80% of the US energy and global energy has come from so-called fossil fuels. No matter how much subsidies, no matter how many tax breaks, no matter how many mandates, no matter how much regulation they put on it, solar and wind are only produced about 3 to 4% of US total energy, and they're at less than 14% of our electrical grid. With the subsidies, with trillion now plus with Biden's original Inflation Reduction Act earmarked, and they still couldn't catch on, so to speak, on their own. So, and the other absurdity of it is the amount of workers it takes to produce a unit of energy for solar and wind versus the amount of workers it takes to produce a unit of energy for coal, oil, or gas. In other words, it's the least efficient energy, and it requires the most subsidies and the most favored regulatory environment. So it'll be great because this is what needs to happen. We'll get rid of all of this ideological and government allocation in the market that's completely distorted our energy policy and created higher prices and shortages.
Well, the Energy Secretary is also a key player, and Chris Wright says that the Trump administration believes the open market should decide how far we go with these issues. Listen to how he put it.
The great thing about the Trump administration is we don't believe we should direct the capital. We think businesses and consumers should direct that capital. You know, for us, our opposition to solar and wind is the subsidies. The government's been paying people to build wind and solar, and the impacts have not been good. They've just driven up electricity and destabilized the grid.
I'm pretty sure you've been saying that for years.
Yes, and it's unbelievable that we actually have someone like Chris Wright as our energy secretary who not only gets it, but articulates it and is turning it into government policy in a way that no one could even push back, because what he's saying is verifiably true across the board. And when he's talking about government picking winners and losers in the industry, this is what we've been doing basically since the early 1990s, when we originally got involved in the UN Rio Earth Summit, and we got involved with the sustainable development, and we got involved with the whole UN climate process. Our energy has been massively distorted by all of this. And if you look at it, even things like, let's talk to gas-powered cars. When Henry Ford invented the mass production of the Model T, you had mom and pop gas stations popping up all across America to meet consumer demand. It was spontaneous bootstrap capitalism, if you will. So what does Biden administration do? They try to recreate that, except this time with EV charging centers and hundreds of billions of dollars going to build a nationwide coast-to-coast infrastructure. Years go by. At one point, there were single-digit charging stations built. It just doesn't work. And now I think they built a few hundred before they're going to be defunded, but it never happened. Even I think it was NPR or PBS went out and they did a ride across the country, and they got in heat waves. Their car broke down, the EV battery. They couldn't get it charged. There weren't enough charging. You cannot have the government come in centrally planning our energy future any more than they could run grocery stores, any more than they've run any other government institution. In fact, it's worse with this because there's something that we now call the government, the private-public partnership with the government, where you end up with a lot more corruption. In some ways, it would be better if just the government ran it like the post office. You would know you're getting horrible service with huge cost overruns. But this, where they hand out these grants, it ends up going to politically connected people like Stacey Abrams, John Podesta, all these former Obama and Clinton and Biden officials. And you get massive corruption, and you don't even get the basics done. In other words, government slow bureaucracy could do a lot more than this corporate government collusion we've seen with this green agenda. That's where the real problem is. But it doesn't work at all. And it's finally time we're getting rid of the distortions in the market. And people will say, oh, well, fossil fuels are subsidized. Fossil fuels are subsidized to the extent of normal tax breaks for any business. We're not really subsidizing fossil fuels at any level. They come up with these absurd claims that we're funding it. We don't need to subsidize it because wherever they're allowed to have a chance, they end up dominating oil, coal, gas, and what we want, of course, is domestic energy and less, almost no reliance on China if we can pull it off. By the way, on that point, just rare earth mining, late 90s, 90% of rare earths that are needed for EVs, catalytic converters, solar, wind, electronics, came from the United States, homegrown. Fast forward 30 years. Estimates are from between 75 and 90% all come from China.
Wow.
And it's chiefly because of environmental regulations in the U.S. forcing us to outsource rare earth mining, which strategic national security is just because of environmental regulations to now China. It doesn't count. We're not hurting the environment if China's doing it, using Uyghur slaves or using the lowest environmental standards on the earth. That's okay, but we can't do it in the U.S. where we actually have good environmental practices, the best in the world environmental practices. So it's just been crazy. So this has been a huge breath. 7 months into Trump, and it's a sight to behold. It's amazing.
Well, I'm from Tennessee. This has to stay simple.
Yes.
But if I can put a bow around that, green energy, air, wind, solar, all this stuff is not really better for the environment. It's not energy efficient. It's not pushing us forward.
Yeah.
Our good old petroleum-based products, carbon-based CO2 emissions, best source of energy, and it's not destroying our world.
Absolutely true. It's unbelievable. And one of the most strategic, of course, is coal, because coal can be brought up online in the market rapidly, and that's something that the United States is hopefully we're reviving that. And by the way, every coal plant built today is probably 90+% cleaner than we had in 1970. If you go back to the first Earth Day, just the impetus for a lot of this, there was a lot of good people worried. You had filthy rivers in our cities, you had filthy air quality. We have shown that in the last 50 years, you can radically improve air and water quality. The World Health says we're among the cleanest air quality in the world. That's where we are, the United States. We did that through technology, innovation, and we did it through not changing. And we didn't do it through solar and wind because we still have almost 80% of our energy from fossil fuels. So we can do it that way. To your point about how ungreen or un-earth friendly the other environment is compared to fossil fuels, to make one Tesla size 1,000-pound EV battery requires 500,000 pounds of materials dug up from the earth, chiefly from China, to make this battery. And then, of course, it has to be shipped, it has to be installed. And the batteries themselves are not really practical over time. You figure once they need to be replaced, it costs more than the car, or it costs more than a gas-powered car. 7% or so of the public has been interested in EVs. A lot of that 7% that have bought an all-EV car are people who are buying a second car. It's basically one saturated set of the market. And what's funny is I mentioned corporate government collusion. The auto industry was all in on EVs when they were getting the subsidies. And companies like Stellantis, which is foreign-owned, European-owned, took hundreds of millions from the taxpayer, would say, we're going to do a EV plant and whatever, take the money, close after 6 months, take the money, leave the Americans without a job. But this is the kind of way, and now, of course, Trump's in and he wanted to get rid of it, so now they were for the EV mandate before they were against it. Now they're against it because that's what they just go with whatever the regulations are. So that's part of the problem here. So what we need to do is make sure common sense prevails long term. And that's where I think the Trump administration is trying to make some things they didn't do in Trump 1.0, and that's make it permanent, because we don't want to just go back if the next president is someone like President Gavin Newsom or somehow that would have happened, because we would end up just going right back within 6 months. But right now, I think we have steps in place to make it permanent.
I like the idea, make common sense great again.
Yeah, there you go.
We can do that. Well, Mark, stay with us for another segment. I'd like to get to the changes at EPA and how Lee Zeldon is shaking things up a bit. In the meantime, please share your thoughts on our discussion by sending us an email. You can go to ajnow.com. You'll find a simple link. We'll be right back. I'd like to extend a personal invitation to join us for our Culture and Christianity Conference. It's September the 19th and 20th on our campus here at World Outreach Church, just outside of Nashville. We've chosen 3 specific topics to explore with a wonderful group of guests. We're going to talk about the church and our expected impact in this culture, the media and their impact in our culture, and then finally, our health, how we can be healthy in the midst of all these competing voices we're hearing. The real goal is how we take our faith and integrate it in our world so we have better lives, stronger families, and strengthen our nation. Join us for Culture and Christianity here in Murfreesboro. We're back now with Marc Morano, the author of The Great Reset and publisher of The Climate Depot. Well, let's move to the new EPA Secretary, Lee Zeldon. He certainly jumped right in, cutting regulations, smoothing the way for smart energy, and doing it with some clear common sense. Here he is describing the new mission.
The Environmental Protection Agency is initiating 31 historic actions to fulfill President Trump's promise to unleash American energy, revitalize our auto industry, restore the rule of law, and give power back to the states. EPA will be reconsidering many suffocating rules that restrict nearly every sector of our economy and cost Americans trillions of dollars.
It sounds like we're at the beginning of some big changes. Is that right?
Yes, as I said, Trump 2.0 has been the most consequential of my entire lifetime. I would say this. EPA's Lee Zeldon, New York congressman. I didn't really follow him before. I'm from Virginia, but he stepped into this role, and within 7 months, he's the most consequential EPA chief in the agency's history, going back to the beginning with Richard Nixon's founding the agency, and he's the most consequential Trump cabinet member, I would argue, because he has come in not just with action, as he mentioned, just 31 actions right there, and I'll get into particularly at least one of the most important things he's doing. But essentially, he has flipped the narrative. And I'm a communications guy. I worked in the Senate during the Bush and Obama administrations. I was the director of communications and a speechwriter for the U.S. Senate Environment Public Works Committee. I did a report of 1,000 dissenting scientists on climate change. And I worked with, I saw the Bush EPA chief, a Biden EPA chief, and I will say this, what Lee Zeldon has done is unprecedented, because even if you compare it to Trump's first term, and I worked for Andrew Wheeler, was his former EPA chief, that was the man who hired me in the U.S. Senate. What Lee Zeldon has done is flip the narrative. He talks about climate change being a scam, a religion, and he's exactly right about this. It is a faith-based cultist religion. He calls it a cult, which is exactly what it is, because this is a Gaia earth worship movement. I've been to the marches where they actually have the 2014 New York City climate march. They actually had pagan earth worship prayers at the march, and they didn't even allow the media. You had to film it because they were in a sort of spiritual trance, praying to the earth god of Gaia. This is what Lee Zeldon has come. He's accurately labeled it. He is reversing all of it, and the most consequential thing he's doing, he is going after the heart of the entire climate agenda in the U.S., the EV car bans, the solar wind mandates, all that, by going after what's called the endangerment finding. It goes back to the Obama administration, which is regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant, human breath. We inhale oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide, I think about 3 pounds a person, and that is now not going to be regulated as a pollutant. They're taking it, they're trying to overturn it, and they're going to have court battles. If they succeed on this, it's much harder to get us back in. Plus Lee Zeldon and Trump administration going after the foundation of the UN climate treaty process, getting the U.S. out. So the next president, if it's a Gavin Newsom, can't put us back in. So this is permanence for the Trump agenda, and unbelievable we have someone like Lee Zeldon. He is just performing at a level I've never seen a cabinet secretary perform at.
Well, you brought good news today. We've got one more question.
I feel guilty with good news because
the good news is
my
welcome
career
here.
lamenting Washington, but yeah, thanks.
Well, one question before we have to go. The EPA is doing away with some of the existing pollution rules. They seem to be out of date now. Can you give us an example of what some of these were and what the result has been?
Yeah, what they've done, in fact, a lot of this that the EPA is doing, and they're saying, oh my gosh, he's ruining protections against air and water. These were done between the time Biden lost in November and the time Trump was sworn in, those few months. They just tacked on so many things. And what they've done, there's parts per million, parts per billion, trace amounts of chemicals that you could do all the regulations in the world that would hammer industry, hammer innovation, hammer energy extraction, but it's going to make no difference in the air quality. We already have among the cleanest air. So this is about putting sanity into these policies and not crippling us based on unverifiable ways that again, we're recognized as the cleanest air. It's not going to make a difference. So any retreat from the most overregulated economy is seen as, oh, you're pro-polluters. It has nothing to do with that.
And it's really restoring a lot of U.S. independence.
It absolutely is. We need the sovereignty to have domestic energy. And that, you think back, Biden administration, this was just 2 years ago. President Biden publicly begging the Middle East, Venezuela, for more oil, for more gas. It's absolutely insane how far we've come with this America First energy agenda. It's a time to behold. If anyone who's a critic of Trump, so thus far, and just look at his energy and climate agenda and how he's worked. This is a textbook case of how to dismantle the deep state.
Well, Marc Morano, thank you for being in Nashville today, and thank you for the good news and some common sense. It's hopeful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
If you want to hear more from Marc, you can go to his Climate Depot site. It's really interesting. Well, in a moment, I'll be back with a hopeful message of our own. Hey, I want to give you a personal invitation to join my podcast, Culture and Christianity.
For a person to think that the Bible is not political, you don't know the Bible.
We're trying to understand how to take our faith outside the walls of the church and live it out in the marketplace.
He will show you what to do, whether it's in our communities, in our country, or other places in the world.
So I brought in some friends, some people that are trying to do this.
How could anyone call themselves Christian and be pro-choice? Is beyond my comprehension.
But I think he wanted them open and in need of him every day.
We have been living through a season of unprecedented deception, propaganda, manipulation.
Everybody says, Israel is attacking schools in the Gaza Strip.
I want to be a part of seeing culture and Christianity intersect. Hope you enjoy the podcast. I am encouraged to see the pulling back of the curtain by our current administration, exposing some of the unimaginable waste that's been happening for years. Billions of dollars spent recklessly over the years. Well, cutting out the waste and abuse and the elimination of the solar, wind, and electric vehicle tax breaks that Joe Biden approved in his so-called Inflation Reduction Act which we now know had nothing to do with reducing inflation. I want to remind you that the government actually doesn't have money. They just have our money. It's the taxpayers' money. So I'm grateful that our current administration has taken some significant steps to determine the best way to get our nation's financial house back in order. Well, I have a question for you. If this administration can assess situations and allocate resources toward better outcomes for our nation, can we do the same for ourselves and for our families? God gives each of us gifts and abilities. Our assignment is to steward the gifts and the abilities that He gives to us. How about when it comes to our financial health? Well, here's a principle I want you to consider. God's the owner of all things, and we're just temporarily handling His resources. If we'll let that principle settle into our hearts, I promise you there are more reasons for hope than despair. We'll be back in just a moment with your emails. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us this evening. If you ever miss an episode, you can always go to ajnow.com. There's a full archive there. You can catch up on the programs. You can share them with a friend. Thanks for emails. They're always a highlight. Tony on YouTube said, "Thank you for your boldness in the public square. It's a breath of fresh air and encouragement for everyone who claims Christ is Lord to be equally bold in our circles of influence. God bless you and God bless America." Well, I believe God will bless America again if we'll have the courage to tell the truth. It starts at our kitchen table, then our holiday table, and then in those extended circles of our friends. If we'll do that, I know God will be faithful. Another viewer on YouTube said, "Thank you, Pastor Allen, for the podcast and shows and bringing clarity to what's happening in our world. You share your knowledge and wisdom that brings understanding and hope to all who listen. So thankful to be a part of your cyber community. God bless you." Well, there's a whole team of us working for these programs to help share the good news, but together, I believe we can all make a difference. And finally, Charlie asked, what does the Bible say about angels and demons? Are they real? Are angels more than just messengers? Well, absolutely they're real. I believe they impact our lives on a daily basis, and they're far more than just messengers. They're a part of the unfolding purposes of God in the earth. There's no Jesus narrative without the engagement of the angels, and you and I won't fulfill God's purposes for our lives without their help either. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us. I'm Alan Jackson, and you have a wonderful evening.